This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. Hello everyone and welcome back to Basket Case Clubs. I'm Michael Connolly and it is my pleasure to be your host on this journey of basket casey goodness. Joining me again is my brother and partner in basket casey goodness, Steve Connolly. Welcome,
but definitely
Steve.
not crime. Definitely not crime. We are out to stop crime. And in fact, topically, you talked last week at the Football Queensland convention about a really interesting piece of crime in clubs, which happens, and a club down in, was it ACT in Canberra, that had been defrauded of tens of thousands of dollars, but more significant than that was actually the financial mismanagement that has led to the realisation or identification of the fact that they're, more than $500,000 in debt?
Well, yeah, now that all the creditors have come out of the woodwork. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, look, this has been a case that's been in the news. We should probably do a whole episode on it, Steve, because it is, as you say, the basket casiness of this is not necessarily the fact that old mate stole 23.5 grand. It's the fact that at the same time, nobody on the committee was watching or calling him out. And we've had that discussion before about fraud, that other people don't call it out. Oh, but he's done such a good job for the committee. And if he's using club funds to pay his personal lease for his car, I didn't really know. Like, yeah, right. I'm calling BS on that one. But the fact that they owed the ACT government 180 grand, like, why weren't they paying that? It's not okay not to pay. Any of those people, if they live in a rental property, if they don't pay their rent, they get kicked out. What were they thinking was going to happen? That all of a sudden, because we're just volunteers and we're a not-for-profit, it's not going to happen? Yeah, right. Like, I should... The air's getting thin up here on my high horse, Steve. So today's episode.
We definitely do need to do an episode on that. But today's episode is actually a special one because this is an episode.
They're all special, Steve.
Sorry, this one's extra special. Yes, you're right. I could tell. I knew as soon as the words were leaving my mouth that you were going to call me out on that. So this session is this episode is one that we're recording as part of our work with the City of Moreton Bay. So we do a lot of work with Moreton Bay and have for decades. In fact, the three previous councils, Caboolture, Redcliffe and Pine Rivers Shire councils, with whom we also did a lot of work, amalgamated in 2008. And since then, we've been working with the City of Moreton Bay to provide education, training, resources and so on for their not-for-profit organisations across the city, of which there are many hundred. It's a very large, geographically, maybe, is it the second largest?
Second or third, it might be third. Anyway, it's one of the big ones. And we're not talking in Queensland, we're not talking in Australia, we're talking in the western spiral arm of the Milky Way galaxy. Like, that's how big it is.
So they've got a lot of organisations and they do a bloody great job of supporting those organisations. And this year, this financial year, through our education and training program, after each of our episodes, we're recording a podcast episode during which we can delve into some of the topics that we only scratch the surface on in the session, as well as then addressing some of the questions that have come in both at the end of the session and since. So really looking forward to this session. I keep saying session, it's because I'm thinking about the workshop, the online workshop, which I must say had a great attendance. I think we had it was one of the highest attended online workshops that we've had, and the City of Moreton Bay do a great job getting people along to those online workshops. And it's a great opportunity for us, as we've discussed on this podcast, to engage with more people than we can work directly with. And it's a great opportunity to connect with a really wide range of organisations and get them together in a virtual room. Yes, it's not as good as being together in person, but there's still some really good networking that happens, sharing of ideas in the chat during those online workshops. And of course, the questions that get asked that other people are sitting there not realising they had until it was asked by someone else. And then the answer that we're able to delve into is valuable for everybody.
Or often hoping that somebody else will ask their question.
Or even that,
very often happes, So it was, it looked like you had a great discussion where you got some really interesting questions. Of the questions that you've got that you've shared with me here, where do you want to start? Is there something that was particularly burning a hole in your?
I think.
A burning question.
Burning a hole in my microphone. There is, and I think that it's one that I largely anticipated before the session, which relates to the structure of your management committee. Now, whether you call it a management committee, a board, an executive committee. In the City of Moreton Bay, we're typically referring to incorporated associations. So under the legislation here in Queensland, the Associations Incorporation Act, that primary decision-making group of members who are elected at the AGM is called a management committee. But what I'm still seeing quite a bit of, I reckon I see a lot less of this than I did 10 or certainly 20 years ago, but I'm still seeing a bit of ambiguity or a lack of understanding of exactly who is on our committee. So we talk about, our committee, and we might say, all right, we've got our executive, and that might be our president, our vice president, our secretary and treasurer, for instance, and then we've got our general committee. So that those two terms seem to still be in the common vernacular across the not-for-profit landscape, and certainly that appears to still be the case in Moreton Bay. So one of the big concerns that I have about that is that we might have, let's say we've got a management committee, and for round numbers, let's say we've got 8 people on that management committee, and they're all elected at the AGM, and we've got what we call our executive, president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and then we've got some other positions. Now, whether they are portfolio roles, which are quite operational, so maybe grants, fundraising, sponsorship, and so on, or whether they might be simply general committee positions that don't have a title but are people who are elected to be on the committee. If there's this, and we've talked about this probably several times on the podcast, if there's confusion as to the level of decision-making authority amongst certain people in that group of management committee members, and what I mean by that is, for instance, we've got our executive, and they can make certain decisions. They don't have to consult the rest of the committee. They can make certain decisions without them, seeking input from the rest of the management committee or committee. And as you and I discuss regularly, and certainly as we addressed during this online workshop, the fundamental responsibility of a management committee member is to be accountable, and that's accountable to the members of that organisation and accountable to external stakeholders. So that might be council, from whom you might lease land. That might be the Office of Fair Trading, who are your regulatory authority for the sake of your incorporation, your legal status as a not-for-profit.
ACNC if they're a charity.
ACNC if they're a charity, indeed.
If they're affiliated to a state and national body.
And if you're a licensed venue or one with, that offers gaming, then the Office of Liquor and Gaming Regulation. So all of that is
contractual agreements to your suppliers. Yeah.
Yep.
So, and I like to say, when people don't really know how to define accountability, and ask, nobody can. I struggle. Like, I've probably been a long time since I've pulled out a dictionary to say, what's the dictionary definition? But simply change the word accountable with answerable. So if something goes wrong, you have to answer to council, regulators, ACNC if you're a charity, supply, all of those people we just rattled off. They can ask you questions and say, please explain.
That's a really good way to put it, to codify it. I think that's easy to understand. And the reality is that even the non-executive committee members are still answerable or accountable to all of those stakeholders, internal and external. So if we've got the executive committee, if we call them that for the sake of this discussion, making certain decisions without consulting or providing an opportunity for input from those other non-executive management committee members, we have a difficult challenge, because we've got people who are potentially going to be held accountable to decisions that they weren't even involved in.
Yep.
So for me, that's the really important one, is that your organisation has to get really, really clear on exactly what the structure of your management committee is, how many people are on it, and who are the people in those positions which are management committee positions. So in the session, we talked about the fact that your quorum, the number of people that you've got to have present for both a general meeting or a management committee meeting, that they are both, the size of that quorum is typically, certainly under the model rules, based on the size of your management committee and the number of people who are on that committee. So practically, it's important to know who is on the committee for that reason, but fundamentally and more importantly, in my opinion, is the consideration that it's those people who are elected to the management committee who are accountable or answerable, and therefore they've got to know that. They need to know that they're answerable, and therefore they need to know that they've got to exercise their legal duties as a management committee member to in line with those duties. They have to make decisions and have the opportunity to be involved in those decisions. So that, for me, that's the big one.
Yeah. The way that I consider this question is, who is the decision-making body? Because if you've got any ambiguity and you don't know who the decision-making body is, you have to find that out. But often it doesn't come about. I'll say often. Often it doesn't come about because of ambiguity in the Constitution. It comes about because of just people having, that's how we've always done it.
Yep.
And it just gets transferred from generation of committee to generation of committee. And nobody actually stops and says, who is the decision-making body? So to take your example, if you've got 8, they are the decision-making body. So you've got the 4 named office bearer positions plus 4 other positions, whether they're called general committee member. And then this term of general committee, I have seen it in some constitutions, but it is extremely rare. It's just this
Yep.
assumption that we've got the executive and then the general committee. So I think the large failing here is still the separation from governance and of governance and operations. Who
Yep.
are the people who are accountable for setting strategy, making sure that our compliance is right, making sure that we're assessing our insurances, doing our budgeting, making sure that we have an asset register? Who are the people who will be held to account / are answerable if those things aren't done? That's the committee. And if those are the simplest way to do it is go back to the AGM and see who was elected onto the committee. This even gets more confusing when we get outside of, say, a sporting complex or a fairly simple incorporated association context and get into, for instance, student leadership. So where I was doing training last week, they're called the Senate, and there's 13 senators. And then sometimes there's a subset of, and in some cases it's called a board, sometimes a council, sometimes an executive, sometimes a committee, sometimes a management committee. Regardless of what it's called, the important question is, as per the Constitution and the legislation, who makes the binding decisions for this organisation? And as you say,
Yep.
in an incorporated association, it is the management committee. Therefore, how do we determine who's on the management committee? Well, who nominated for a position on the committee and was elected at the AGM or through our election process? That's how you determine it, and it's so important. But the failing is still, I think, the separation of governance and operations, where people are putting people onto this thing that they call a general committee because they're the people that they need to help in a little athletics club go and set up the
Yeah.
long jump pit and set up the high jump mats and all the hurdles and everything. They don't have to be committee members to do that. Those are operational tasks. The people who mark the lines, the people who put up the corner post flags, the people who put up the goalpost nets, the people who can put on the goalpost pads. These aren't people who need to be on the committee. Yet so many clubs in sport, particularly, still put them on the committee. That's just it's a waste of time, and it's a waste of the valuable leadership time of people who should be doing better jobs. So if somebody wants to
Yep.
be an operational volunteer, let them be an operational volunteer and do not make them come to a committee meeting. But because I guarantee you, if they're sitting there and they care about corner posts or goalpost flags or canteen pricing, they have checked out for the important discussions about budget and insurance, and vice versa. The people who are there because they know their accountabilities / answerabilities to their members about setting a budget, running to the budget, making sure that they're meeting all of their compliance obligations. You mentioned liquor licensing. What about gaming licensing, even charitable and not-for-profit gaming licensing through their raffles? Because they know that they can get in trouble. They can be fined personally and as an organisation if they mess things up. They have checked out when it comes time to talk about how much we're charging for a hamburger in the canteen, because that's an operational decision that should be delegated.
And isn't it interesting when we have this really exposing, soul searching discussion with committee members, how many of them actually identify for themselves during that discussion that the things that give them energy and the most enjoyment are actually the operational things?
Yeah.
That they just took on the committee role because no one else stuck their hand up to do it.
Yep.
And the problem with that is exactly as you say, it's the governance that's going to drop off the bottom. And we did talk about this during this session, that if we're so focused on the urgent stuff that every day distracts us and takes our attention from the important stuff, it's the important stuff that's going to drop off the bottom. And in the world of governance, things aren't urgent until they become urgent. And unfortunately, it's often too late once something becomes urgent. We didn't have the right insurance coverage. In the City of Moreton Bay is based an organisation that I often tell a story about, which is a bloke who injured his back lifting paint tins on and off his ute. At both the place where he volunteered, the organisation with which he volunteered, and then the place where he'd purchased the paint. He did terrible damage to his back, something with which I can sympathise.
You know a lot about that.
and was off work, and it cost tens of thousands of dollars to get him put back together again. And when the club went to claim on their insurance, the insurer said, sorry, you've got public liability insurance and this gentleman is not the public. He's a voluntary worker and you don't have voluntary workers insurance. So we're sorry, in inverted commas, but we can't pay up. So that's too late. Making sure that your insurance coverage is appropriate and that you've got the right insurances in your insurance pack is important. And unfortunately, the catastrophic situations like that, which I talk about regularly, highlight the critical shortcoming in many committees where they only focus on the operational urgent stuff, the things about which people are going to whinge if we don't get it done today. We don't have our classroom set up at our U3A for our next class. People are going to be upset about that. But if we're not thinking about the long-term viability of our organisation, we might not be negotiating the next opportunity for discounted access to an existing classroom at some other facility, for instance. So I think just quickly I want to come back to that separation of governance and operations and the fact that we've got this primary decision-making body that are elected at the AGM. And that's the easiest way, as you said, to identify who's on our committee. And it's still sometimes a little unclear because we might, let's talk about a sporting organisation, or let's talk about a U3A, a University of the Third Age. There might still be really operational positions that are elected at the AGM, which might not be management committee positions. So there should be really, really clear delineation. We say in your agenda and minutes to say we are electing the management committee, and these are the people who are going to be answerable to our stakeholders. And then we're electing these other positions. Now, we advocate that you don't have those other elections at the AGM unless there's a really good reason to, but they can generally be appointments that might happen outside
by the elected leaders. The elected leaders
by the elected
appointments. Yeah, based on an EOI for who's the right person for the job.
Yeah, and so you might still call for show of hands at the AGM for people interested, but it doesn't have to happen at the AGM.
And look, that's, I think, what's most important about this discussion is that we get to okay, so how do we fix it? If this is where we're broken, how do we fix it? So very clearly, go back to the AGM minutes and determine who's on the management committee. Go to your constitution and have a look at what it says there. Really practically, our AGM minute and agenda templates have that in there. They say who are the people we're electing and who are the other positions that we're going to appoint. So yes, for any of our listeners that want a copy of that, send us an email at info@cprgroup.com.au and we'll get you a copy of that. Please request the AGM minutes and agenda template and we'll get that to you, because that's how you can fix it. Just having very simple reminders like that come up at the time is how to fix it. But then if you've got clear and by the way, next time when you get to the AGM, if your constitution says, as most in Moreton Bay certainly will, and many for everyone else all around Australia, it's going to say the number of people elected to the committee is the number that we decide at the AGM, or the numbers that members decide. So decide how many it is, but make it smaller. If you've got 4 people who are doing the governance and 4 people plus everyone else who are doing operations, then you only need 4 people on the committee. In fact, the minimum in most jurisdictions is 3. So we only need a minimum of 3 people, and sometimes that's enough. Because when you get to that point of your question about urgency, let's talk about urgency and importance. And while it was Stephen Covey's 3rd habit of highly effective people, put first things first, that popularized the concept. It was actually Dwight D. Eisenhower, I think, one of the presidents leading through complexity, who realized that the decisions he needed to make, he needed to compartmentalize and say, is this actually an important decision? And is it an urgent decision? So you've got 4 quadrants in a matrix. And we spend way too much time in the stuff that's urgent, whether it's important or not. So some of the stuff that's urgent is important. Dealing with a tribunal complaint, for instance, dealing with a player injury, for instance, they are important and they are urgent, and so they take our time. But a lot of the things that we think are important, like spending all of those extra hours editing a newsletter that nobody's going to read, not setting up because it's easier to just keep responding to that email manually, even if I copy and paste the text from some Google Doc into Gmail. No, there's automation that you can set up. If you've got 100 parents asking the same question at the beginning of every season, automate that answer. And tech will do that now in a matter of minutes, but we don't, as volunteers, typically take a step back and say, what can we do that business is doing to make life easy? And then we just keep doing the same. So it's getting into quadrant 2, the stuff that is important but not urgent, that is critical. And I've often said, operations is where urgency lives, and so people keep getting sucked out of governance land into operations land because that's where it's urgent. We've got this grant application to do. We've got this event that we've got to run. We've got the person who normally does our social posts is away, and so I've got to get in and do a boosted post on Facebook about this event. That's urgency, and yes, it's important, but other people could have done that. And so when people step out of operations, nobody dips up. Nobody then goes up and does the budget, does the constitutional review, considers how we make sure that we've only got the right number of people on our decision making body. So get that right. That's the answer.
Yep. Yeah. And one of the other points that I just really quickly wanted to come back to, and then we might move on to a specific question that was asked outside the format of the actual online workshop, and then we can probably leave it at that. But I just wanted to point to where the decisions that your organisation makes should be made. So we talked through this requirement, and this is captured in the Club IQ meeting guide, where we talk about the different types of meetings that will be taking place in any typical incorporated association. And they include, for instance, the two decisions at which the two meetings at which formal decisions can be made, being our management committee meetings and our general meetings. So I often point to, and did on the night, the requirement that we meet at least 3 times a year as a management committee. So that group that's elected at the AGM, the primary decision-making body, as you mentioned earlier, they've got to have at least 3 meetings a year, no less frequently than one every 4 months. The minimum requirement for our general meetings is the meeting at which that committee are elected, the AGM, 1 general meeting a year. So that very fact alone tells us that most of our decisions, the most frequent decision making, should happen at our management committee meetings, because they're the ones, and typically, I'm sure that the vast majority of our incorporated associations across the City of Moreton Bay will have more than 3 meetings as a management committee a year, but that's the minimum. So that clarifies for us that we've got this group of people who are elected at the AGM, and then we essentially hand over the decision-making powers to them, because it's not efficient for us all to be involved in every decision. So we hand over the decision-making authority to them for them to make decisions for the next 12 months, for instance, on our behalf. So that's, I think really critically, the point that I wanted to really hammer home is that your organisation's got to be clear who's on your committee. They are the people who are answerable to internal and external stakeholders, and it's those people to whom you delegate decision-making authority for the time that they're in office, their term in office, for instance, and empower them to go and make those decisions. And so in that session, we talked in detail about the processes that the committee might follow for making decisions, and that might include some urgent decisions made between meetings, for instance, a resolution in writing. So what we often remind committee members of is that you've got to go back to your constitution. For if there's any lack of understanding or any ambiguity around the decision-making processes in your organisation, while we talk pretty generally about what's common, go back to your constitution and make sure that you're making decisions in line with that document.
So one thing I think that before we move on to the next point that you want to make, because it's kind of linking, is if you do follow that process where you don't have a whole heap of management committee meetings because they're limited to governance. All of the operational decisions are happening at the right level because we've got appointed people. We've got a coaching coordinator, a paid technical director who makes the decisions about coaching. They're operating within an approved budget. The management committee are not the experts when it comes to coaching. The management committee are not the experts when it comes to officiating, refs or umpires. We should have a coordinator for that, and it should be the right person. And they should have delegated authority to at least make decisions within the confines of their delegation. So that delegation concept is so important and so powerful, because you can set a delegation for a committee, for instance, a committee of the management committee, so a subcommittee, and that delegation can be either binding decision making. So the committee can say, well, look, we're going to set up a committee for an event, for instance, or a social events committee. That social events committee could be allocated a budget and a high-level business plan, if you like, to say what is it that we want this committee to achieve through the course of the year. And then within that budget, they go and just do it. They don't have to come back to the management committee for approval because they've been delegated authority to make those decisions. Or it can be, say, for instance, in some of the more formal governance committees, so say an audit and risk committee. The audit and risk committee will do the first run through of the audit when it comes back from the auditor, and they will also compile the documents to go to the auditor. So it's not the entire committee or board who's doing that, it's a subset, maybe with some external expertise, whether they're members or non-members sitting on that subcommittee. They will then make a recommendation to the board, because it's the board who needs to put forward the financials for approval at the AGM, for instance. The subcommittee can come through and say, we recommend that, subject to these changes that might have already happened in toing and froing with the auditor, that hasn't then taken the full board or management committee's time. It's just taken the subcommittee's work to do that. A committee recommendation comes to the board. The board can then, with confidence, say, we're exercising our duty of diligence and skill by the fact that we've been through this process with our subcommittee. We are now approving it to go for recommendation by members at the AGM. So that concept of delegation is how you deal with the transition of governance and operations on a day-to-day basis.
And we don't often see it done well, do we? Unfortunately.
It's my vision that it happens a lot more. So it's only in, as I said, the more sophisticated organisations that we get to work with, that where it's starting to happen well. But it doesn't need to be. Like, it could be, if you've got 500 members, that's not a little club, and you should have a level of sophistication where you're bloody making your life easy. All too often, we've got committee members that are getting in their own way, making life hard for themselves by being a little overthinking things, just trying to do too much, not recognizing what is my job as a president versus what was my job as an age group coordinator or a coach. Very different, guys. Think about it the right way. And this is where the transition here into this question that came up about, can the committee write their own code of conduct? Of course they can. There might be parameters. So that's the question. Can we write our own code of conduct? Can we manage our own, the way that we deal with our own operational considerations? Absolutely, you can. There may be confines or guardrails within which you need to do that. And there might already be a code of conduct from a state level or national level organisation that sets the framework for the way that it works in this sport, so that there's consistency. And that's what members want. If they're travelling to play football on the north of the river or the south of the river, the game day should run consistently, so we know what to expect and we know how to deal with what's going to come up. But when it comes to our operation, and certainly this then goes down to the level of a board charter or subcommittee charter or terms of reference, which are kind of the rules of engagement, how often we're going to meet, what are the expectations of me as a committee member between meetings, to read the papers that come out beforehand, ask questions, meet my duty of diligence in going into that meeting. Of course, you've got delegated authority to the organisation, the board or committee of the organisation exercises the powers of the organisation. So it's the people who need to do the stuff that the organisation, this body corporate, that doesn't have hands and a mind of its own to do the thinking. We need people to do that. It's those people who get to say, this is how we're going to create something that works for us.
Yeah. Yep. And your comment about terms of reference or board charters, I think, is important in the context of the discussion. In the context of the question as well, because the person who asked this question also said, can we require new committee members to sign this code of conduct? And we say, absolutely, that's a fantastic governance principle or pillar, is to say there's accountability here, and we're going to take away the opportunity for any committee member to plead ignorance. I didn't know that I had to assume that all items discussed during board meetings were confidential, and therefore I thought it would be okay to discuss it with my couple of classmates on a Thursday afternoon, for instance. So we advocate that confidentiality agreements, or codes of conduct or board charters, this sort of document that sets out very clear expectations of the people sitting in our fundamental governance decision-making roles, is a great step. And if you do exist in an affiliation framework where there are governing bodies to whom you affiliate or report in some way, then, like you said, get across whatever codes of conduct or behaviour they might have, because you don't want to prepare something that's grossly contradictory to what they've got. But you can go into more detail and you can complement that by saying, in the context of this sport or this activity, this affiliation framework, we prescribe these additional layers of expectation on our decision makers, for instance. So, and the other part of the question is, are all members of our organisation automatically bound by the code of conduct of our governing body? I think that this one is probably a little more case by case, because if really for someone to be bound by a code of conduct or behaviour, they have to have agreed to be bound by it, or be aware at the very least that they're bound by it. So the answer to this part, I think, probably is it depends on what the process of application for membership looks like and whether those people have agreed to be part of that affiliation framework. Typically speaking, the answer is yes, and increasingly, particularly in sport, we now apply for membership at the national or state level, and then we identify our local club as the one with which we're going to be participating in that sport. So we're very clearly joining that ecosystem. We're becoming part of that sporting organisation ecosystem. So good questions. I think that, this we're never going to tire of discussing governance, nor are we going to tire of discussing good meeting practice and getting really clear on who the primary decision-making group of people within your organisation is. And we advocate really strongly that if anyone has any questions and anything's unclear at the end of this session or this episode, just get in touch. We're real people.
Yeah,
we'll answer your phone call or we'll reply to your email.
I love that question in there. Is there any legal reason which justifies someone refusing to sign a code of conduct for a committee member? It's a condition of being a member of this committee. You are under no legal obligation to sign it.
Yep.
If you don't sign it, though, and it's in expectation, obviously within our duties and within the law, that if you don't sign this, you can't be a committee member. So no, you're not legally bound to sign it. But if you don't, you're not welcome to serve on this committee. And I would question, because especially if we've prepared it, Steve, it's going to be reasonable. There's going to be nothing unreasonable in there, but it might be a little more than they're expecting. Like the fact that you don't just turn up to meetings. You prepare before you turn up to meetings, and you turn up to meetings on time, and you contribute during meetings. And if those meetings are online, you bloody have your camera on. There's no toddling off, peeling sweet potatoes in the kitchen and pretending you're in the meeting. I heard last week about a very significant board meeting where the CEO was left running the meeting because everyone else had their cameras off, and she was saying, listen, I kind of need you guys to vote on this because I can't take your silence as agreement to this. And the motion was never passed because people didn't even turn their mics on to say, yes, I agree. They didn't put anything in the chat.
Oh,
that's unacceptable. Like, you can't be like that. So that would be in breach of a code of conduct for the board. So definitely you got to do it. Steve, this has been good fun. I think that we'll have quite a few of these questions to get through, so keep them coming. For those of you who are attending each of the sessions with Moreton Bay, please keep good questions coming. Even if you're not attending those sessions, keep the good questions coming, because as Steve just said, there's no limit to our ability to talk governance nerdy stuff. We absolutely love it and it's not because we love governance. It's because we love the people who want to make what you do happen. I don't care about sport, but I care about you because you care about sport and you want sport to happen. And I want you to be able to do your governance job so well and so seamlessly that the sport can happen so well, or whatever it is that you're doing. If you're running a charity and there's operations, you look after the operations, we'll help look after you so that you're in a position to make sure governance is really well looked after. Steve, I look forward to seeing you again next time. Well done.
Thank you, Mick. Great session. Yes. It was a great session. Yeah, really good. Thank you to everyone who attended, and thanks for tuning in for those who've listened. And yeah, keep those questions coming, and we'll see you and hear you next time.
See you, Steve. Bye.
Bye.
Basket Case Clubs acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country on which we record, being Yugambeh, Turrbal, Jagera and Kabi Kabi land. We recognise their enduring connection to land, waters and culture, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to First Nations listeners.